CBS News Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan joins us from democracy's birthplace there in Greece, as she is traveling with the president. And Margaret, again, listening to the president's speech today as it regards NATO commitments, assisting refugees as the crisis unfolds in the Middle East, his support for the Paris Accords. Obviously, as he noted, his views differ markedly from those of the president-elect. What were the highlights today from those remarks?
Well, this is difficult for President Obama, who has to have a lot of private, awkward conversations, but yet project this sort of optimistic view of the future of America and how it relates to the world under President-elect Trump, when he himself is not quite clear on what Trump will do, other than these private assurances that he's not going to break apart from NATO and our military alliances. But what you heard in the speech today was really focused on cooling down some very nervous people here in Europe who are looking around and seeing not only the type of populist movement and anger that Donald Trump was able to tap into, but seeing similar forces here in Europe, whether it's Greece, whether it's Germany. There is a fair amount of anti-immigrant rhetoric. Remember the refugee crisis really engulfing this part of the world. Anti-globalization, frustration because of the financial difficulties that this country and others have dealt with coming out of the debt crisis. And this disorientation that President Obama described today, that he pinned blame on social media in some ways for, and the information age, basically saying people are so inundated with change right now that they're clinging to whatever identity they can. And he pinned this sort of nationalism, crude nationalism as he called it, on that trend. But he really tried to take an uplifting point here, saying America can still be counted on. This is the birthplace of democracy. Let's focus on what you can still count on from the United States, peaceful transfer of power being one of them.
As we did just see stills of the president's visit to the Acropolis earlier today. You mentioned the anger there in Greece, the anti-EU sentiment there. We know there have been riots and clashes between protesters and police in Athens. What can you tell us?
Well, some of that does typically happen this time of year because of a national holiday, but it also was a group of what I'm told are typically left-wing protesters here who were planning to march to the U.S. Embassy, some communists, some anarchists, some who are just anti-U.S. A lot of that deep-seated anger at American foreign policy going back decades, where in the past the U.S. did support a dictator, a strongman of sorts, at a time when there were democratic movements otherwise. So it's always a good reminder to the American people that just because we have an election every 4 years or reset for 8 years, it doesn't mean that the rest of the world forgets what happens when America, as the global leader over the past 70 years, has instituted very different types of foreign policy. And so that's really why, Josh, Americans are so looked to for upholding the global order, because it is such a military behemoth, it is such an economic behemoth, that the direction that America goes in oftentimes can impact the rest of the world. And that's why there are so many questions. We're so focused at home about what Donald Trump could mean for domestic policy, but the rest of the world is really wondering, what does it mean if America's role as the global leader changes? And so in that context, President Obama is heading next to Germany, obviously the EU stronghold, if you will. What's on the docket? Yeah, economic engine of Europe. Germany has also become really a political leader within Europe. And to President Obama, the Chancellor Angela Merkel has become one of his closest allies. He calls her the closest. They partnered together, particularly focusing on how to push back Vladimir Putin from some of the attempts at land grabs he's made, particularly with that military intervention in Ukraine. So Russia will absolutely be a point of conversation in his private meetings with Angela Merkel. But this is also a country that has been inundated with refugees, that is going through some political frustrations going into the 2017 election there. There is some concern that a populist wave could take away that bit of stability here in Europe. So there are a lot of difficult things that the president will talk through. And this is extra awkward when President Obama and Angela Merkel stand side by side at a press conference tomorrow, because Germany's chief diplomat publicly called Donald Trump a preacher of hate. And he said that don't doubt that this is going to make working with America a lot tougher. So he's in many ways brushing off these nice faces being put on American alliances remaining strong. He's saying quite clearly that's not going to be the case with us, certainly diplomatically. Angela Merkel may have some cleaning up to do when she speaks to the press, and President Obama on Friday will be sticking around as well to meet with the leaders of France, the UK, Italy, Spain, and Germany. It's a meeting of the minds to figure out what's next for the direction of this continent, which is already frustrated in dealing with Brexit, a threat to the stability of the European Union itself.
That's what awaits the president. Of course, as we see over your left shoulder, the president will be leaving quite a magic hour there in Athens. Margaret Brennan, as always, we appreciate it.